I'm Kirsten Bennett, Chief Executive of Cambridgeshire Acre. We have got a packed 2 hours for you. First of all, we're going to have presentations, then we're going to have at the end plenty of time for discussion about sort of the future of Warm Hubs and what we've learnt from running them over this winter. Before we start, we've got the chat function running, and I see people are already posting in that, which is great. We're not going to go around and introduce yourself, but if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, say where you come from, perhaps why you're here today, please take the opportunity to do that. Through the presentations, we will use the chat. So if something comes up that occurs to you or you want to ask a question, please do use the chat at that point. We're going to then use that to bring that together at the end. So we won't stop in the middle of the presentations or after each one. We'll bring that together at the end. When you do want to speak later on, if you could please use the yellow raising hand emblem and put your hand up, because then it's easier to queue up who's going to speak when and where, and we know that you do want to speak. If you could also please keep your microphones muted. I see most people have done that, but just to keep the background noise out with this number on the screen, that would be good. And I think Alison's already started recording it. I was going to warn people, but we are recording this session. A, so we've got a copy of it, and B, so if anybody who wasn't here or you want to share it with colleagues afterwards, it will be available for you to do that. So why a Warm Hubs learning event? Well, Warm Hubs really started for us as Cambridgeshire Acre back probably in the end of the summer, at August time last year, through a concern in rural areas for the cost of living. We were concerned about obviously the rise of the cost of living and people having increasing isolation, increasingly struggling to pay their bills. And we were noticing that particularly through another project we were running, which was about supporting people with their energy costs. So having good connections in rural areas, we started to think about how we could support people better in their rural communities. And one of the things that came to mind was a warm space, a warm hub, a warm space where it was free and welcoming, quite simple really, a simple aspect of people coming together, run by volunteers in a very local level. So as we run the village hall service for Cambridgeshire, that also obviously became very obvious that village halls were often not sitting there. They are well used, but often there is space in those buildings for more community things to go on. And since COVID, we knew that people were perhaps not getting out some more and coming together in groups. So working with East Cambs District Council and South Cambs District Council, we approached them with the idea. And we're fortunate that they were speaking to the Integrated Care Partnership at the time about funds to tackle health prevention coming forward. So the two things really came together, and we said, well, actually, we can support communities. We're keen to do this. So can we, at pace, try and set up some of these warm hubs? So we did this by using our connections in communities, sent out an email, and what a response we had. I think we had, well, it was hard to deal with the results. I think we had 60 communities come forward with their volunteers and say, hey, this is something we'd really like to run over the winter, and how do we go about that? So then obviously we thought about the model we were going to do, how we were going to support volunteers to run that, and what the outcome would be, how we were going to get people to come along, and how volunteers were going to be trained. So that's how really we went about our warm hubs. But in the meantime, the rest of Cambridgeshire, the other districts, all obviously thought, well, actually, yes. And it became quite a national theme was going on, that these were good things. And they started to set up warm hubs as well. And we have obviously over the time been speaking to each other about how warm hubs have developed and how they've been run. So bringing all that together, we had this idea of today's event. We've got through the winter now. We've had an awful lot of learning to share that with you all, share what we've done. So we're going to hear from every area of Cambridgeshire that has had a Warm Hubs programme, and then at the end, obviously, we're going to I think there'll be a lot of learning between what we've all done, but then we're going to have more of a debate of how we take that forward. So I'm going to introduce the first speakers, which is Alison Brown, Head of Business Services at Cambridgeshire Acre, and Jessica Sullett from Rose Regeneration. Just to explain, Rose Regeneration is a consultancy company that Jessica works with that have done the evaluation of our programme. So been working alongside us all the way through this. So Alison, if you want to start, I'm going to hand over to you if you want to do your slides.
Thanks, Kirsten. Right, so yeah, in addition to my day job as Head of Business Services, I've been project managing the Warm Hubs in East and South Cambridgeshire. So I'd just like to tell you a little bit about them today, the support they've been providing and the difference they're making to the communities that they're based in. And we're going to take a little look at what we've learned so far from running this programme. So what are Warm Hubs? We've helped set up 38 Warm Hubs across East and South Cambridgeshire. All of them have delivered a warm, safe space for people to meet in, and that's been for up to 6 hours per week per hub. As a minimum, every Warm Hub has provided free hot drinks and Wi-Fi for people, but sometimes they've added on additional refreshments and organised additional activities. And the other thing that we've linked in with our Warm Hubs is access to advice and support. That's been really important to us. Perhaps the most important point I'd like you to take away from this slide is that our Warm Hubs are very much community-led. We've delivered this as a supported volunteering programme, which has been about allowing community volunteers to step forward to support other people in their community. So we've given the idea to the communities and we've provided them with financial support thanks to the integrated care system, but the communities have taken that idea and really run with it, and they've all developed their hubs to support the needs that they see in their communities. I'm just going to share a couple of maps with you now, just so you can see. So this is the map for East Cambridgeshire, when you can see the square dots on the map are the locations of the Warm Hubs that have been set up. And then the associated dots in the same colour as the square show where they've drawn their volunteers from. So what you can see here is we've got a very good geographical spread of Warm Hubs across the district, but also what you can see is how local they're, how close to their location they've drawn their volunteers from. So this has been very much sort of a hyper local volunteering opportunity for people. So very much about people wanting to give back something in their own community. And then we've got the same map, but for South Cambridgeshire, and obviously it's a far bigger patch, but again, still quite a good spread across the county. And there's 25 Warm Hubs in South Cambridgeshire compared with 13 in East. So in terms of what Cambridgeshire Acres' role has been in setting up Warm Hubs, our role has been very much about supporting the volunteers to do this. So we've done that by ensuring that venues are safe, but by providing some initial training to the volunteers, helping those volunteers then to promote their hubs in their communities, but then also sort of a far wider sort of whole sort of campaign approach to promotion as well. It's been about keeping volunteers engaged by providing them with additional training and new learning opportunities as the sort of programme has gone along over the winter. And obviously the final thing we've really done is administer the grant funding that's been available to allow those Warm Hubs to cover their operating costs. So I mentioned the training that we've given to the volunteers running Warm Hubs. So our focus has really been about raising capacity in the community so those volunteers are able to support other people, and particularly those who are most vulnerable. So it's been really important to us to be able to offer some accredited training, and you'll see here the sort of food hygiene, first aid and safeguarding training we've offered, so that people really begin to build the confidence to do those things and to operate their Warm Hubs safely. And you know, really, this has just been about, you know, and we talk here about the monthly networking events that we've provided. So we've continued to sort of drip feed, if you like, new information, new learning, new ideas into the hubs, so that as those volunteers have got more confident in what they're doing, they've got new knowledge and expertise then to relay into their hubs. Just going to share some pictures of some of our warm hubs with you now. So this is the Hadnam and Wilburton warm hub, which takes place in a sports and social club. And while I'm showing you this picture, I was really just going to mention some of the activities that have happened in Warm Hub. So alongside this sort of very informal sort of social space for people, people have done sort of games and activities. There's been arts and crafts going on, play sessions for children. There's been chair-based fitness classes, and we've begun to see some real sort of skills sharing going on. So, for example, people helping people who weren't so confident in using a mobile phone or a tablet to sort of develop those skills. So that's all sort of naturally evolved as the warm hubs have moved along. This is the warm hub at Willingham, and while you're looking at those pictures, I was just going to mention that hubs have laid on lots of special events. They've used those special events as a sort of mechanism for really engaging their communities and drawing new people in. So perhaps people who might initially have thought, I'm not sure a warm hub's for me, but you know, because there's been a special event going on, people have given it a try. So we've seen things like spuds at the hub going on, so jacket potato lunches, we've seen quizzes, we've seen live music. People have done things like clothes exchanges, particularly sort of children's clothes, which obviously, you know, during a cost of living crisis and the rate children go through clothes, you know, that's been a really good idea to help people, you know, swap things around. We've seen art competitions, toy swaps, and then obviously it's sort of bonfire night and Christmas. We had people sort of tagging events with those particular themes in mind that really helped draw people into their hubs. And these pictures I was just going to show, this is at Camborne, which takes place in a church, and Hardwick, which also takes place in a church, but in a very small back room of a church, as you can see, and they really pack the people in there. And here I was just going to mention really about how we've linked into information and advice. So this has been about organisations beginning to visit warm hubs. So we've seen some social prescribers visit, we've seen housing wardens visit, local authority advice buses, for example. And then the volunteers have been trained up to make referrals to other organisations who can help people. So if people begin to mention things like, you know, they're struggling with their fuel bills or they're struggling with food, they've known who to refer those people to for additional help. The other thing we've begun to see as well is hubs beginning to arrange home to hub transport for attendees. So we always knew that, you know, getting people to the hubs might be a complication, you know, particularly, older people perhaps who don't have such great mobility. So it's been really good to see hubs beginning to address that for themselves and beginning to see how they could arrange community transport to get people from their homes to the hubs and back again. Just wanted to share some real sort of key statistics from the last 4 months with you, and there's some quite staggering figures here. I think what this really shows, if you see here, here you've got the total hours that warm hubs have been open, and then here you can see the amount of those hours that's actually been funded through this project. So it's sort of only 2/3 of the provisions actually funded by the ICS funding. And I think really what that tells me is that if you give communities a small amount of financial support, and if you work it out, it's about £1,500 per hub, you know, they will use that money and they will use that as a springboard to sort of lever in more and do more with that. So you do get a significant return in your investment. We've now seen over 10,000 visits to warm hubs take place. And then if you look at this massive amount of volunteer hours that have been provided, every hub's got sort of an average of about 10 volunteers. So if you sort of stack up all those hours and sort of cost them up at the sort of median pay rate for the districts, you know, that's over £270,000 worth of volunteering time. I'm going to pass over to Jessica now.
Oh, thank you very much. So I've been working along with Alison and the team over the last 4 months, carrying out the evaluation, and we're looking at kind of three broad themes around that. Firstly, kind of what systems and processes and arrangements have Cambridgeshire ACRE put in place to support the warm hubs. Secondly, kind of what impact and outcomes are the warm hubs having on the people using them? And then thirdly, are these warm hubs providing kind of place-based support in ways that do improve access to services and volunteering opportunities? And this slide just summarises some of the evaluation activities we've been doing with volunteers, partners and service users. And there are two things on this slide I'd just like to draw your attention to. The first thing is we're really interested, in light of the statistics Alison just showed us, who's volunteering at warm hubs and how are they benefiting? And we're using the short Warwick Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale to look at that and to ask them how positive they're feeling. And it's really interesting because 30 to 40% of them were not feeling optimistic about the future, we're not feeling useful, we're not feeling close to people when they first became a volunteer at a warm hub. And we're going to be repeating those questions again with them at the end of this month to see if some of those scores have improved. In the meantime, from going along to the warm hubs and talking to some of the volunteers, it's very clear how much they've enjoyed the training and learning they've done through warm hubs, how they like sharing ideas, and how some of them have started to feel part of their community. So we'll see if those results improve. And the second thing, I'm conscious that colleagues have joined us today from Cambridgeshire County Council and East and South Cambridgeshire District Council. They've been doing a piece of work around appreciative inquiry and visiting warm hubs and very much listening to the stories of the service users and volunteers. And I think for me, what's really interesting, there are similar themes emerging from the appreciative inquiry work with some of the survey work we've been doing with service users around companionship being the main reason that people are going along to warm hubs, that the service users feel really listened to and they don't feel a burden, and that there's no one size fits all because each hub is being kind of locally shaped by its community. They've also highlighted the importance of providing service users with links to other services and being able to feed back to other service providers. We move to the next slide in terms of just some overarching findings emerging from the evaluation. This is absolutely a community-led approach. And whilst warm hubs are a place for people to kind of come together and meet, the informal nature of that has been really, really important. And that comes through in the information we've collected from the service users and the volunteers. I think the second thing is the role of Cambridgeshire Acre, which has been absolutely pivotal. I mean, Kirsten in her welcome explained how many expressions of interest there were. And I think that just shows the kind of roots and reach that Cambridgeshire Acre has into communities to get that response. And I think the work Cambridgeshire Acre have done, both initially and the ongoing support they provided to warm hubs, has really helped build the capacity of communities and provided them with an affiliated network to kind of plug into. And for me, what's been really interesting for the evaluation is to see the kind of communities to community learning that's resulted from that. But what's also been interesting is how warm hubs have generated some new volunteers. So 32% of the people who are currently volunteering in warm hubs, this is their only voluntary commitment. And the other thing that I think is really important to flag with you is, yes, people are initially coming for companionship, but I think what we've picked up on through the evaluation are the kind of multiple and complex kind of health and well-being needs and conditions that the people coming to use the hubs have, and the importance of them being able to kind of access kind of community and statutory services has been really important. In terms of kind of what's worked less well, I think the first thing to say, which has come from the volunteers and from some of the service users, is the name Warm Hub. So does that carry a stigma of being too poor to heat your home? And some volunteers believe that there may be a reluctance from some people in their local community who perhaps are struggling to pay their bills to come forward and go into the Warm Hub. I think there are some factors, because the warm hubs had to get up and running really quickly. You know, perhaps they didn't have as much choice around the venue, the day they did, and time that they'd open. I think the third thing is, therefore, we might not be reaching everybody who would benefit from the support that warm hubs currently provide. I'm also aware that this is a pilot, and I think in moving forward, for us as the evaluators, there are two important things to flag with you. The first is, so how can we further develop the current advice and support programme so that we can have more of a whole system approach and bring together residents with other public health and community organisations and services? And secondly, how can we develop this work digitally? So, you know, at a place level, could we think about the venues and the volunteers in terms of their connectivity and the equipment and the hardware, but also upskilling some of the, not only the volunteers, but the service users, and also perhaps offering a simple online platform where hubs can kind of interact with each other to provide a digital means for some of that community learning.
Thanks, Jessica. Right, just one more slide from me. So I think what for us, you know, what I would say, these last 4 months have really proved to us quite definitively that there's a need for year-round provision of community hubs. That's what the attendees are telling us. It's what the people who are running, the volunteers who are running the hubs are telling us. Keeping the hubs community-led is going to be vital for building sort of true community resilience and ensuring that those hubs reach those people who need their support the most. We're now supporting hubs to consider their future operations, and that's including raising their own funds to match to any publicly available funding. What we've found through this work is that really one size doesn't fit all. So we're looking to put in place a very flexible model so that hubs can develop as their communities need them to. That's really important. And we're looking to strengthen the hubs further by better linking them to the health and care providers so that support can be delivered right at the heart of communities where it's needed the most. I'm going to stop sharing now. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison and Jessica. That's great, and opened up the first example of the hubs. I'm going to move us on, I think, so we can get through the presentations to the next presentation, which is Vicky Hayward, Community Development Manager from Cambridge City Council. So we've had sort of a rural look at hubs, and this will be a more urban look at how hubs have been developed in Cambridge City. So Vicky, she's got the slides up.
Well, if I can get my mouse on the right page, I'll put it on the right button. So here we go. I've just done one slide, nice and simple. Keep it short for you. I think, sorry, just to introduce myself, I'm Vicky Hayward. I'm the Community Development Manager in Cambridge City. And we have a slightly different approach, although I think the outcomes are very similar to what we've already been hearing from previous speakers. So I'll whiz you through what we did slightly differently in Cambridge, and then happy to take any questions. We haven't had a long-standing relationship with Cambridge Eureka, and we'd already seen in Cambridge a number of community initiatives that were coming forward themed around warm hubs and warm spaces before the funding was available through the ICS offer and tackling health harms from the cold and the cost of living this winter. So we took a slightly different approach, and what we did was we used our funding in the city to launch a micro grants programme to communities, offering them £1,000 to come up with a community-based solution to tackle the cost of living crisis this winter and to create projects or events where they might make the most difference. And we invited community groups to tell us what they thought would work and how they would be able to do that. Feedback from previous examples, what we've tried to do is strip out quite a lot of the bureaucracy, and that seems to work quite well by a very simple, basic online form application, just using 5 or 6 questions, not putting barriers in the way that groups needed to be constituted or checking lots of details and insurance and all those kind of things. And we ended up with 43 successful projects that were funded. And we had a small number of bids which were not successful, which were business driven and couldn't necessarily demonstrate they were already reaching a community where they might make a difference. So some of the feedback that we've heard and thinking about what has worked well, and again, this is just echoing what you've already heard really, is that where communities are already planning and leading events, their interventions through the micro projects and warm spaces made the most difference. That they were able to expand their existing offer to either make their provision free or provide what they were already doing alongside an additional meal, or it provided a community space to keep their doors open for longer and warmer with heating. And we were able to offer community development support alongside those projects. So we've hosted meetings to share learning and experiences and support groups and organisations with practical tasks like the some of the admin and some of the comms which were needed around promotion and posters and those kind of things. So desk-based exercises that some of our officers at the council could support with was taken up massively by community partners, and that seemed to work really well. We're using the same process alongside Wendy and East and South Cambs, and we're doing appreciative inquiry, and that has started to send officers out to projects across the city and see which ones have worked, which ones have not worked, and what the feedback is. But generally what we're seeing is a number of the projects want to carry on. They want to expand what they've already been delivering in communities. A lot of groups want to move away from calling them warm hubs and focus on a community living room approach, which was much more friendly and does come with that less stigma, which you previously mentioned. And again, we need to focus on early co-production earlier on in the programme, rather than the quick nature that we had to set it up didn't necessarily allow for much of that to take place. But certainly lots of energy in Cambridge City to support communities, to be keeping things local, and to join up and connect. The ones that have been really successful, it was very clear, already had really good connections with their residents and their communities and with existing partners. And that partnership approach to being able to tackle whatever the current issues are have really come through, I think, with this piece of work. And we're looking now at how we might be able to carry on some of that work and support some of these pieces of work going forwards in the future. But it's really interesting to hear that the rural outcomes, what we're seeing is very similar to what we're seeing in Cambridge City. I would say that quite a lot of the projects in the city have focused on children and young families as a focus, rather than a lot of older people, although equally they've been successful in terms of bringing people out, creating connections in communities, and being able to link into what wider support needs could be met through a hub-based model. And that's all I was going to say, but happy to take any questions if anybody wants to ask anything about a slightly different approach.
Do you want to oh, I think we have got one question we can quickly take. Leslie?
Yeah, just quickly, thanks Vicky. Just interested to know if those were existing groups that were extending their offer. Do you know whether they were able to, or whether they were attracting new people, people that hadn't, you know, gone to those groups before? So you had like a new demographic.
Yeah, some of them have. And some of them haven't. In fact, we went and did an appreciative inquiry. A colleague of mine went and did an appreciative inquiry this morning, and they found that their attendance at their warm space room just really had been very low. It turns out that in the same building, there's a coffee morning, and they hadn't thought to link the two things up, and they very determinately kept them very separate. So really good piece of learning from that group and from us, really, about really understanding how they're practically trying to deliver this and whether we can shift their thinking about joining things up. Yeah. But definitely people were able to offer more in terms of community meals, seems to be the thing that drew people in, and being able to focus on that, you know, families eating together, communities eating together, and that being an opportunity to start conversations about other wider systematic kind of neighbourhood changes as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question now from James, then we'll have to move on because we're a bit short on time to get through the presentations. James?
I'm interested, I'm sorry if I'm jumping the gun, but I'd be interested to hear a bit more about the advice and information stuff that was brought in and the training that was given to people. I don't know if that's jumping the gun and we're coming on to that, but I'd be interested to hear from all the speakers really about how they brought that into the hubs.
I'll tell you what, I think that'll probably come up at the end. Shall we park that?
That's fine.
Definitely something we can pick up on later, because actually I think we'll pick it up properly through all the presentations, and then we can all answer it together. They can all answer it together because it might have been differently in different places. Yeah. So yeah, we put that in the chat, or we can keep that on the back burner, so to speak, to pick up James later on. Okay, I thank Vicky for her presentation. I like the name community living rooms. That's a new one on me, but that's another good name for it, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
going to pass the credit on to one of our local churches who came up with that, but it really is starting to resonate
Yes, yeah.
with people. It's much more friendly, isn't it? It doesn't come with that stigma of coming out of your house because you can't afford your heating.
Yes, yeah, nice, good. Okay, so if we move on to Hannah Robinson now, who's the Project and Programme Support Officer at Huntingdonshire District Council. Hannah, I'm trying to see, yeah, Hannah's got some slides that are coming up.
Hello,
Hello. Okay, Hannah.
can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Harriet, the Programme and Project Support Officer from Huntingdonshire District Council. I've been in the role for 2 months and I'll talk to you following on what Alison and Vicky have spoken about already. Firstly, it's worth mentioning that out of the 44 warm spaces that HDC oversees and helps support, I visited 30 of them. So out of 30 warm spaces, that's about 1.5 cups of tea. And that's an awful lot to take on board when you've had cups of tea already and they all want to help you out and feed you with cakes. So lots of long walks afterwards to try and burn it all off. I don't know if any of you had found similar, but it's a very welcoming and rewarding experience. We have 44 warm spaces on our books that have been around since October 2022, and they've come on board through reaching out to the local community post-COVID to see what can be done to support residents during the cost of living crisis and through the colder months, similar to the previous 2 speakers, and 44 have come on board. We have a slightly different setup in terms of the financials. So these warm spaces have already been established, run by volunteers within their local communities. What HDC has done has offered £500 pockets of community chest funding, which they have to apply for, and it goes through a panel process where 2 of our executive councillors approve or query their request for funding. And out of that, we've had £6,900 worth of funding given out since October. The warm spaces vary in size. The range is from about 10 people coming along for a cup of coffee and a chat, all the way up to 60, which is a bustling mothers and toddlers group. There are key established community hubs that have already been set up, and HDC takes on the role of a facilitator rather than an instigator from the very beginning, which is great because it's a very sustainable model as we go further into cost of living with budget cuts everywhere. We're hoping this will definitely help out with longevity. We've had 4 inactive warm spaces, primarily because of low turnout and having trouble around promoting their spaces. Whilst we don't promote it for them, we can assist here and there with directions of where to go. For example, promoting on social media, websites, local press, things like that. Main activities include having a chat, go for a cup of coffee, puzzles, games, crafts, knitting, and as of course recently, pancake making. We have an on-site communications team here who do an absolutely fantastic job with promoting the warm spaces, primarily through social media and through the Hunts Post. And just through 27 social media posts, we've reached over 75,000 people. So that's been absolutely fantastic. Here are a few examples of some of the articles that our communications team, Hannah in particular, who deserves a special shout out, has put together to promote our warm spaces within the district. So in the top left hand corner here, you've got Ramsey Library, where they do a mothers and toddlers group, and it's absolutely fantastic. They also offer other connections in place there as well. You go there if you have debt trouble, things like that. The bottom left is Yaxley. You can see the 2 smiling ladies putting lunch together for about 50-60 individuals each Monday lunchtime. And I want to highlight a particular quote that Ben Pitt, our executive councillor, made in the bottom right. The cost of living crisis is resulting in unprecedented pressures on people. That's very true, and I believe it's only going to get worse. So where are the spaces in particular? I've highlighted the 3 main areas on the left-hand side. So starting from the bottom left, we've got St Neots, so quite a few there, about 10, going up to Huntingdon and then across to St Ives. Those are our 3 key areas, which makes sense because that's where the population is. The main takeaway from this slide is to see there may be 1 or 2 areas that are remote and rural, maybe lacking in public transport, that still need that attention too. So it's trying to work out how to help those people going forward. And I'll be interested in our discussion later on to see if other people have found that that's the case. In terms of our evaluation and feedback, something that we've been triaging in-house at HDC is our We Are Huntingdonshire website, which aims to help residents with any issues they have before they reach a crisis point. And these issues can come across things like debt issues, can't feed themselves, can't pay for their children's school uniforms, things like that. And we have a fantastic in-house resident and advice team who speak to these residents, and they're often referred through a variety of different means, one of which is Warm Spaces, to assist those vulnerable residents who really need help. What we're seeing on the Warm Space side of things so far is that the referrals are quite low, but we want to get that going further and further through the coming months. We offered some particular training on this site. There's an online referral form there, and this training was offered to professionals specifically. You can see in the pie chart there, social prescribers attended, some people from Cambridgeshire County Council attended, individual from Coresco, and we had quite a high response rate on the survey. Out of 32 people who attended the training, 18 responded, so that was good going for a first survey. This is quite a wordy slide, but my main point in providing this to you is to show you some feedback from the individuals who received the training on how it was received. So the first one highlighted in pink is the second one down. Timing of the training. So it was only made during the day. That's good to take on board. Let's try and do it in the evenings and weekends to make it more available for people who have a 9-to-5, families, etc. And the fifth one down, people talk about social prescribers specifically. What happened to the resident after they'd been referred? And it's a really tricky one because people are very interested in making this Warm Space scheme a success, and often doing the first bit of referring them and not being able to find out what happens later on can be quite tricky. And I think a lot of it's GDPR related, but that was a common area of feeding back. And my last slide speaks about plans for the future, both short and medium term, and the difficulties we face. So in the short term, we want to continue supporting our Warm Spaces into this warmer months. And this supports what Vicky and Alison and Jessica have spoken about already. What will this be called? I love the idea of community living room. I think that's brilliant. But basically my point is anything but a warm space. People don't like the term, they're embarrassed by it. There is a real stigma behind it. Call it something else, community space, whatever you like. And we're looking to hold a celebration event to acknowledge and celebrate the hard work that our volunteers have been doing for their local communities within HDC Warm Spaces. In the medium term, we want to integrate the social solutions training tool with as many professionals and partners as possible, and as well as continuing support of those spaces who want to remain open during the coming months. Long-term plans not on there because we don't know what this will look like in a year. We don't know how this is going to progress. We're not quite sure what's going to happen. So I think a lot of you might feel the same way. Funding, what's going to be available, volunteers who are going to be out there to help support each other, individuals working for councils and organisations like ourselves, who's going to help run and coordinate things. I found that organisations aren't talking to each other in terms of what they offer, whether that's Age UK, whether that's Anglian Water. So the key events like community days are really important because it allows everybody to get together, and it would be great to have more of those going further down the line. The information's out there, but residents don't know where to go or how to access it. Volunteers, I found, don't want to be trained specifically in our WAH website tool because they already have enough to do. The responsibility and the onus on them is huge already, and it's understandable that they don't want to take on additional work, especially when they're giving up their free time. And it's interesting, very recently I found out that all of us are doing a very similar thing in running our warm hubs, and we're not really talking to each other, and I'd love for that to definitely change. I suppose I can play the newbie card here by saying, oh yeah, let's all get together and have a chat and share ideas, because that's ultimately what it's all about. But that's everything from myself. Any questions, just shout out whenever, but thank you very much.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Harriet? No. James?
I suppose, is there something that we can actually have a look at the social solutions tool, so we can do a bit of looking at it?
Yep, it will take a little bit of time, for which I'm conscious of, but I can follow up with you afterwards, James, or host a different session. But short answer, yes.
Well, if there's a link we can, sort of go and have a look at.
Yeah, I'll pop it in the chat. No problem.
Brilliant. Thanks.
And I think Graham, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Harriet. Really, really good presentation, really interesting. Look forward to seeing the slides subsequently with some of that finer detail. Could you say a few words about the long-term sustainability? Because I think you touched on it, as did our colleague from Vicky from Cambridge. So what is it that makes those warm hubs sustainable? What's the model once any form of funding is removed? Could you say a few words about that?
Certainly, it's volunteers and local communities managing it themselves. We are a facilitator. We're not the sole funder of it. So they might seek funding from their local parish council, their local town council, but we're not the sole financial backer of it, which is what makes it sustainable in the long term, should they want to continue.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And I take what you say, Harriet, about working together, because I think we've all been quickly fast setting these up. We're at the point now, and this is great today, where we're all listening to each other and learning what's going on elsewhere. But going forward, we can definitely share things more, can't we, across the whole of Cambridgeshire. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you.
We'll move on to the next speaker, which actually there's two speakers now from Cambridgeshire County Council. So we're going to hear about the warm spaces in libraries and in child and family centres. And we've got Anna Mahone, who's a project
I'm a library development
support officer at Cambridgeshire County Council, and Mary Barnes, who I think Mary's here as well, who's a child and family centre manager. So over to you both. You're going to do a double act. So I'll have you got slides or?
I've got some slides. Do you want me to do those? Are you hearing me okay, Kirsten?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, if you want to share your slides.
Sorry, I'm not getting them for you. There we go. Can you see those?
Yeah, they're coming up. It takes a time sometimes.
Okay. Yep. Sorry about that. I'm just going to go with how they are. So I've got a few slides, but I'll whistle through them. We did what we call a warm welcome in Cambridgeshire Libraries. We get that to move. There we go. We've got 33 staffed libraries all around Cambridgeshire, 12 community managed libraries, which are volunteer run, and also 380 mobile library stops, just so that you understand the reach of the libraries. Our standard library offer, which most people know, you get free lifetime membership. We have friendly, trusted staff, information signposting to services. Obviously, there's the book offer and learning and research resources. We also have a significant ebook offer, e-newspapers, e-magazines, e-audio. What some people aren't so aware of is that we offer free Wi-Fi in all our libraries, free to use computers, printing and photocopying. In most libraries, the study or workspace, except for the very small branches, charging points for phones, which is significant during the cost of living crisis. We also put on social activities for all ages. So that's rhyme times for babies, reading groups for adults, all sorts of other things. You are allowed to talk in libraries. The shushing days are over, and you can bring soft drinks and snacks in with you. And they're one of the few public spaces where there's no obligation to spend money. We signed up to what's called Warm Welcome, which was a national grassroots campaign. I don't know if everybody's aware of it. It's all on one registered website. There were webinars and advice for the organisers, and it was mainly places of worship and libraries that signed up. Libraries through Libraries Connected, which is the kind of umbrella organisation across the country for all libraries. And so all the branches of Cambridgeshire Libraries registered with the Warm Welcome. And we put out leaflets on the right explaining what we were doing. We also hosted cost of living drop-in events at quite a lot of our branches, all the large hub libraries, but also some of the smaller ones. And these were held in partnership with, for example, Think Communities team from the council. I'm very grateful for all their support. And the point was to create these under one roof information and advice sessions with all sorts of different agencies. providing information on grants, money management, energy saving, etc. We thought libraries were a good place to hold them because they're kind of no stigma venues. You could be going into a library for any reason. You know, you're not kind of outing yourself as attending a cost of living event, but then you can go and get the advice you want. That said, warm welcome and cost of living events, the attendance has been fairly modest. A little hard to say with the warm welcome because we weren't asking people why they were coming into the library. It was a little bit, except in just a few branches where there were volunteers involved who were making it more of a warm hub type event. We were just carrying on with our normal library business, but making libraries available to, you know, stay a little longer if you wanted to stay warm. So we weren't really counting. It was hard for us to count whether people were coming for the warm welcome or they're just going to the library. And the cost of living events, the attendance was fairly modest, but the impact for some people was really significant. And I've got a couple of slides. So for the warm welcome in general, I think this might be Ely Library, an elderly lady visited. She had no food but was hungry, said she had no heating. Staff referred her to COB. They offered her hot drinks and biscuits, and she's been back several times since then to say thank you. Another adult came in, no heating, no way of talking to his landlord. So the library introduced him, kind of referred him on, and also introduced him into groups held within the library social activities. And he's been coming on a regular basis. So we made some, you know, significant impact for some individuals. And likewise at the cost of living events, we had an example of a woman she was new to the area because she'd left an abusive relationship, and finding all the agencies under one roof meant that she, you know, saved considerable time and stress by just talking to everybody there on that one afternoon. The impact on the library service of kind of introducing the warm welcome aspect to what we do, it has made us think more about the events and activities that we put on, and it's prompted us to add some more in-person events of various kinds, like coffee clubs and Read a Little Aloud, which is where people share books by reading aloud. We've also some of our libraries have taken part in national initiatives such as the coat stand offer, where people can bring a coat and then anyone can take it, no questions asked. We've seen more working from home customers, which was something that we did anticipate might happen. You know, working from home is so much more common now, but if you're struggling to heat your house, a library is a good alternative place to come and bring your laptop. Oops, sorry. And it's also enabled greater partnership working with district councils and other agencies, which we've really appreciated. An example in Ramsey, the Neighbourhood Trust enabled the library to stay open more than its usual hours in order to sort of extend the offer. Reflections that I've had, and it's, you know, I've really seen that that's been reflected in what other people have reported. Distance and transport might be a barrier to people accessing libraries, and also some of our libraries have fairly limited hours, or people are confused about what the hours are. So that's something we should be thinking about. And also, you know, we're aware that not everybody has a relationship with the library. People may not realize that they're not the sort of be quiet places that they used to be, and also conscious that some people may be embarrassed to admit needing support, so might not want to come to the library to look for help for that reason. And then, you know, everybody's been saying we need a different name, and yes, I agree with that. We should perhaps be emphasizing more the social activity, maybe sharing energy rather than emphasizing the need that people may have to save money. And I've also been thinking a lot about, you know, have we consulted the potential end users of warm spaces who are not using them? Obviously, we can get feedback from the people who are coming in, but what are those other people looking for and not finding yet? And lastly, I wanted to say, you know, libraries have and always will be welcoming spaces. So our offer will continue because we'll just continue being libraries. You know, we continue to offer a low-cost inclusive program. aimed at combating social and digital isolation. And it is a year-round offer. And we would like to invite any Warm Hub volunteers who might be closing down activities for the coming months, come join the local library as a volunteer and help us out continuing the offer through our library spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Do we have Mary, are you going to say something about the children's centres? I don't think we can't hear you, Mary. I think Mary's no. I think we've got a problem there with Mary's laptop or speaker. Okay, if it comes on later, Mary, you can always join you into the conversation later on. You can tell us a bit more about what's happened at the children's centres. Okay, so thank you everyone who's presented. I think there's some common themes coming through those presentations, and that's what we're going to pick up and discuss next. But before that, we scheduled in a 5-minute comfort break, just so you can stand up and stretch your legs before we go into that part of the afternoon. So I have got this exactly on time. I was a bit concerned because when you've got presentations, it is quite difficult to swap over, but well done everyone. So we'll have a 5-minute break, and we'll be back here about what would it be, 3 minutes, about 3 minutes past 3, 5 minutes past 3 to carry on. Okay, thank you. Hi, Mary, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah, very clearly now. You're back in, okay. Do you? I see you've got your slides on the screen. That's
Oh, you
fine.
can see them. That was my
Yeah,
notes.
yeah. So we can take them next when people get back.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know what's happening on my laptop today. It's lying to me.
At least you've resolved it. You're back in, all right.
Yeah, just did the old turn it off and turn it on again.
Yeah.
Can I ask who should I send the slide set to?
Who to send them to? Sorry.
Can you send them to me, please?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Sorry, who's
Alison,
talking?
sorry.
Alison, yeah.
Alison.
Difficult to see who's speaking. Okay, I think most, I can't exactly see, so obviously some people have still got their cameras off, but I think most people must be back by now. So Mary, you've obviously got your slides on the screen, so shall we start now? If you'd like to give your presentation now, that's great.
Hello, I won't be very long. I've only got 3 slides. So my name's Mary Barnes. I'm actually the Family Hub's lead for Cambridgeshire, but and my cat started to meow now. It's all going wrong. I also oversee child and family centres in the county, and I saw what Cambridgeshire Acre was doing. I thought this is an opportunity for us to do something a bit more bespoke for our young families, and also that our child and family centre buildings are more suited to the families rather than our older residents. For those of you who don't know what a child and family centre is, it's a building which offers, and in that building we offer services for families from 0 up to 19, but we also deliver lots of services from play activities to right up to intensive family work for those on the border with social care. That's the kind of thing we do in a nutshell. So we could see that some of our families, through that kind of one-to-one work, we could see that families were suffering from the cost of living, and this might fit in well with what we offer. So we set up some family warm hubs, which was basically just opening up our space in our buildings for unstructured sessions. Most of our other sessions are structured, and it's aimed around some kind of educational aspect or support access. But we just opened up the buildings for 3 hours weekly from last November. For families just to come and just be warm, enjoy the space, enjoy the resources, and have a hot cup of tea. We don't have the resource to go further than that, to offer food or anything like that. So as you can see from the stats, wide variety of success. East Cambs worked well. Lot of attendance, but right down to Cambridge City with only 2. And what else going on there? And it's where there was other provision offering something very similar nearby, that were perhaps more established. They were going there instead. So that's right, just taught us something. Yeah, interestingly, it's only mothers and children. We had no men, but that would be something to do with the time of day this was offered, perhaps stereotypically thinking that men are at work. But that gives us something to think about, whether we need to offer more kind of twilight, later sessions. What they comprised of was, as I say, that space to come and sit and just chat, hot drinks. There's a chance to wear your baby if you have one. There's a clothes swap, so mainly for children, but there are adult clothes as well. And when we say swap, you don't really need to bring anything. You can just take what you need. Dental packs, we have arrangements with oral hygiene practitioners. And book start packs, which my library colleague on the line will be pleased to hear, and any other kind of other resources we had lying around, really. And the chat was the important element of this, I think. So I asked her that those that were running it were our own staff. We didn't need to employ volunteers. So I asked them what you were talking about, what people were talking about with each other, and it was these things. So cost of living, it was in order of popularity. Cost of living was the top topic, and mental health, right down to where can I learn English. So that was interesting.
Mary,
Mary,
I think,
sorry
I don't
to-
know if you
oh,
move your
sorry.
slides down.
Oh, I'm moving them here, and then they're not.
Yeah, I
okay.
thought that. Yeah, they're not moving
Yeah.
on everybody's screen.
Oh, I'll just run. Oh, I
Your
don't know what to
laptop
do.
must be running slowly.
I'm nearly at the end, so I'll just keep talking if that's all right. So the things they talked about were cost of living, mental health issues, where can I get food? So we signpost them to food bank, signposting to the 111 health service, what's on for them and their children, general child development ideas, childcare, school application processes, and randomly, yeah, about where can I learn English. I'm moving the slides on here, but it's no point, is there really?
Oh,
Can you see it now?
it has moved now on mine.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, just changed it. All right, so that was that list. And one more slide, but here we go. So other kind of anecdotal things that we captured. A mum said she was glad as a company she'd not left the house with a newborn for 5 weeks. So, you know, if we were to evaluate that, just even that particular comment, that could have perhaps, you know, prevented some kind of spiral into depression or low mental health, had she not made that connection. Yeah, and not surprisingly, one mentioned she was using the hub to save putting on heating it on at home, and also to give her the chance to play with some different toys with her child. One parent now is coming regularly. She's very isolated and suffers with anxiety. So walking through that door was a big thing for her. But now she's built up a good relationship with the workers there, and she's confident now to come to other activities. But as others have said, several families came along, but then felt that stigma that we've been talking about, and felt they didn't want to take a place away from those who they deemed may need it more. So either left or didn't come back. So as you've all been saying as well, we thought we want to continue this post April, but under a new guise. And what we found was the important bit was the chatting. So we're going to continue them, but call them coffee and chat. And I think I might move the time of them a bit to try and help accommodate those who are working. So same chance to come and just use the space and meet others and reduce that stigma. Yeah, and from other feedback, we've also said, from other feedback we've gathered from our other activities, often parents say to us, we're fed up with you providing us with structured things where we have to learn and understand more about education. We want to just meet and chat. So that meets that need as well. So that's what our plan is going forward after April. And I'll stop sharing. Any questions about that?
Thank you, Mary. Okay, well, what we're going to do now, we're going to move into the open discussion anyway. So if anyone has got any questions, I'm sure we can wrap that up into that. So I'm going to pass over to Ivan Anbel, who is from Rose Regeneration, is going to guide us and facilitate us through this discussion. So Ivan, over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Lots of similarities from the presenters and from the evaluation that Jessica's led. There are 3 or 4 things I might say just to frame the discussion that would be interesting to get people's views on. The first is, what are we going to do next? Are we going to have cool hubs or some other term for things in the summer? The second one is volunteers and how important they are to the functionality of these places. The third one is sustainability, in terms of how long do we think these things can continue to function without ongoing support. And the fourth one is networking. And thinking about the points that were raised, for example, by the lady from Huntingdon about, you know, the fact that lots of people are doing these things, and there's been several presenters here, but, you know, people in the city of Cambridge and people in deep rural settings, all with similar experiences, but perhaps this might be the first time everybody's come together in one place. So they're the key things I think that that it's worth perhaps using to frame the discussion, and I'm hoping somebody's going to be brave enough to dip their toe in the water and offers us a first view in relation to any of those four things or anything else that occurs to them as a consequence of what's been said so far. We can begin the pregnant pause now for a while until somebody sparks up and offers us a view. Thank you, Harriet.
Hi, Ivan. I agree with your summary. And firstly, and I should have said this at the beginning, Alison, thank you so much for putting this and bringing us all together, because I've just found it so valuable. So thank you so much for that. Secondly, I'd like to focus on your networking point, Ivan, purely because I'm still quite new and don't know anybody. So I would value something like this every month, every other month, if it's online, to touch base. I don't know how everybody else feels. And with regards to your longevity sustainability comment, I had a question about where everyone's funding was coming from, and where does everyone else see how long do they see their warm hubs and spaces going? So obviously ours within HDC is sort of self-sustainable. We give a little nudge of funding here and there. But I know a lot of people have a lot of funding, but they're doing vital work and helping really, really vulnerable residents. So what's the future plan for funding there, really?
Excellent. Well, thank you for kicking us off. So I don't know if anybody'd like to pick up from there and offer a reflection on some of the key things that Harriet's raised.
I suppose just putting together a couple of different comments that have been said around, you know, the volunteering as well and the sustainability. I mean, those two things obviously have an interlinking, and the funding. There's a lot of pieces that fit together in different ways, differently, I think. And, you know, just taking up that comment about volunteers' capacity to take on, you know, more detailed stuff like the portal, I think that's, you know, I suppose one of the reasons why I came to this was because we're looking at community hubs and how that sort of brings value. And I think we were really interested to hear the sort of narratives that are going on that actually warm spaces have, you know, proven this kind of cauldron of perhaps unintended positive consequences, and, you know, some learning around actually what they were originally set up for hasn't been really the benefit that's been seen. So I think for me, there's something about, obviously, when we capitalize, when you see that something beneficial and working, then you want to capitalize on it. And I mean, maybe it's not one model, it's a few models, but I think, you know, the idea of that kind of it providing an opportunity to work with people, I think that's the bit that I'm interested in, because I think, you know, we probably, any of us have been working in the community for years, we know there are people that fall through the net. And I've been a big believer for some time that you get an opportunity for somebody, and you don't know when you might get the next opportunity for that person. So when those opportunities come along, how do we pick those people up and pull them back up into the net, if you like? How do we, you know, how do you grab those people and go, great, this person's come along and they've just come along for coffee and a chat, or they've come along because their heating isn't working and they want to stay warm that day or whatever. And then actually that isn't just, do they come along, they have a nice time and they go home again. How do you translate that into actually taking that opportunity to actually make a difference in people's lives and empower them and, you know, signpost them onto other stuff? I think it's a really important question for me, because I think, you know, that is potentially a lot of the value of something like this. And it's worth us thinking, I think, about how that works in a volunteer model and how that works in a non-voluntary model as well, or a combined model. But, you know, that for me is, I suppose, where my ears are pricking up.
I think that whole issue about neighbourliness, for want of a better term, and how some of the people that come to these facilities that we've established, that's the golden retriever just deciding she's got something to offer as a view. But I think that whole issue of how we identify and support, for want of a better term, vulnerable people in this context is very interesting. And I think we've had a wide range of different capacity at these hubs to, in terms of our experience of the evaluation, to support people, because the origin of the vast majority of these has been around volunteers and people who want to put something back into the community, but who aren't perhaps always equipped to deal with certain levels of acuity when people present. And I think it is an interesting thing just to reflect on how one would deal with some of those people who've got probably slightly more developed needs. And I know Alison and I have talked about one or two examples of people who really perhaps needed some statutory support and some of the issues that flow from that. So I think that's a really interesting issue just to bear in mind. And quite often, some of those issues aren't huge. They're just about people perhaps just not looking after themselves as well as they might for a whole range of reasons. So I think it's really important, that point you make, James, about how one deals with the range of people that come and how one equips the volunteers, in most cases we're running these places, to do that. I think Diana had her hand up and then put it down again, so I don't know if you still want to say something, Diana, but then I'll bring in Leslie and Kirsten.
Oh, hi, sorry about that. I
right.
put it in the chat, but I just wanted to say that Cambridge County Council, we have some seed funding at the moment, which we're talking to Cams Acre about, and Ely PCN about using that funding towards extending the warm hubs throughout the year. So that's a chunk of money that that's in East Cams we're about to use.
Okay, well that's really useful just to note. So Leslie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, we've all been on a huge learning curve, a really steep learning curve since August. If we think about it, the hubs really have only been up and running for the last 4 months. So we've still the opportunities and the needs that are emerging from these hubs, we're only really just beginning to understand. And so I think we need to give these hubs time to embed themselves, that there's so much opportunity for I guess we're seeing that opportunity for our rural communities to start to connect with those wider statutory and other voluntary services. So we all know, I think we've recognised that there's a lot of help out there, but it's matching that help and identifying those people that need it. And again, in rural populations, we know that there are a lot of people that are living in isolation, but we don't know where they are. And I think one of the challenges, which I think Anna raised, was that there are people attending these hubs, but what about those people that are not attending that we feel should be, and how do we continue to reach those? I guess that's where that neighbourliness comes in. And again, the longer that these hubs are enabled to remain and sustain, I think they will continue to sort of gain traction and really sort of strongly embed themselves in communities. In terms of, or in answer to Harriet's question, we are seeking additional funding from the ICS, which was where we gained our funding last year. And again, we're working with Cambridgeshire Acre. In fact, outside of this, I'm sure Alison and Kirsten are really busy working up a new proposal for us to have a sort of look at what we feel the next 12 months will hold, and how we will continue to sustain some of these hubs in our communities.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Yeah, I was going to come in on the volunteering point, because I suppose the approach we've used with the volunteering, which does seem to have worked in the two districts we've been working, is what and I don't know the great term, but we call it a sort of supportive volunteering approach. So it's allowing volunteers to have community ownership and flexibility over what they're doing in their own place. So the hubs are modelled around what they wish to do in their place, but equally we're there as Cambridgeshire Acre to support them with the questions, the sort of funding, where they get funding from, support, the training support, the peer learning from each other, so they don't feel isolated in their own place, and that drawing together. And that does seem to work well. It's a model we've used actually for quite a few years with our say our village hall network, which is similar. You've got volunteers running a village hall in each area, and we network and we use that to bring them together. So we've modelled it on that. And I also think why this works is because it is so local, and you've got a place in the middle of the village or the town that people know and will go to. So it's like an anchor in the middle of that place that is welcoming and is something somewhere now people know. The point about the outreach, I do agree, not everyone's going to turn up there, they never will they? But I actually think you could use your community more once you get going to reach out to their neighbours more through training and through support of how to do that. It could happen more that we do. They bring their neighbours along to it, but that's obviously we haven't had really time to do that in what we've been doing at the moment.
I think building on Leslie's comments about time to get these things embedded, and a couple of things that have been put in the chat, it is interesting just to reflect as part of this discussion on the fact that we're breaking, in some senses, new ground here, because the impetus to these things has been, rising energy prices and perhaps more widely the cost of living issues. But quite often an external threat can be very cohesive in terms of building the capacity of a community to be more mutually supportive, and that seems to me, too, that in with some of the comments made earlier about sustainability, to demonstrate that this is really quite important, because I think given more time, these facilities will start to give some really quite deep benefits in the community they're based in, from the evaluation work we've done and from the discussions or the views that have arisen as part of this discussion as well. And I just hope, I suppose, reflecting on somebody who's been around a long time, that these don't become faddish things that we lose interest in another 6 months or a year, because actually I think they've probably unleashed something quite important, which previously might not have arisen. I suppose they're a positive unintended consequence of the cost of living crisis, really, although some of them go back earlier. I mean, some of them have been around for a longer period of time, but I do think we're at the sort of early middle point of something that needs a bit more time for us to fully understand it in the light of this discussion, at which point it's probably quite good to play in Wendy, particularly as I know she's led some of the appreciative inquiry work, and we'll have some sort of insights from actual users. So Wendy.
Thanks, Ivan. Actually, a lot of what I was going to say echoes what Kirsten was saying, in terms of, I think one of the kind of really good things that we're seeing happen through this, which we don't see very often, is how kind of the model, I suppose what I know is the East Cambs bit, so sorry if this isn't the same everywhere else, but how it kind of supports that local shaping of exactly how communities want their thing, want their own initiative to be, whilst giving that kind of level of support and training and everything else. So it's I think there's something clever about that model that provides all the support that's needed without taking away or without imposing you must do it like this and this, rather just like, here's some core things. I think it's what Jessica was saying as well. I think that feels really important, and I suppose that also then links with what we were hearing, and I think came out from all of the different appreciative inquiries around there being a real sense of each hub having its own flavour, having its own personality, and that should be something that's embraced and grown going forward. So while you might have those core things around inclusivity and a very, very kind of simple core offer, but actually everywhere has its own, it is absolutely its own thing. I mean, personally, I think each one could name themselves whatever they want to name. I don't know whether that matters. But yeah, just allowing that local personality, I think, is important. Sorry, I'm waffling now. That was the main thing.
No, I think it is important what you called if you're in Northumberland, because they've had the temerity to try and trademark warm hubs. But anyway, we've decided we're moving away from that as a title, so they're welcome to keep it. But I think there is something very insightful in what you say about place, because I think we hear this term bandied around, don't we? Place-based approaches, and it seems to be the next spin-on from asset-based community development to me. But I think these hubs are going to be most successful if we don't take a one-size-fits-all approach to them, and that we enable them, and I think it's key to enable rather than to try and direct, but we, as third parties, we enable them to arise out of the grain of where they are. I do have a slight worry. I mean, I'm not an expert on Cambridgeshire, but I've done work in Fenland, for example. And I would have thought that there are some bits of the county that currently don't necessarily have the kind of support that other places do. That there's probably some really good work that could be done in those places, because there might be some communities in those places that wouldn't necessarily, without a bit of help, have a hub that arises. And I do think we've got a bit of a pick and mix variegated map at the moment, which is good in many senses, but I do just wonder about those places. And I think somebody earlier in the discussion raised this point about what about those places that haven't got a hub. So I think it's worth, just as particularly some of the organisations on the call that have got influence at a kind of a macro level, just perhaps bearing that point in mind. But sorry, Vicky, you've waited very patiently while I've rambled on. So
thanks, Ivan. I think this kind of leads on from what you were saying and what Wendy was saying about that place-based approach, just to share some insights, really. So Cambridge City is very urban, and a lot of the hubs have been provided by services and community interventions that are already taking place, not necessarily led by volunteers. Quite a lot of them are connected to a paid service that's being delivered. So it's a slightly different model. So one of the risks for us in the city is, do we see a tail off of community support, which we saw at the end of COVID, after there was a lot of community response, very fast growth in community response to tackle what was a crisis situation, and then support tailed off, and we weren't able to capture that new income of volunteers and community activism as some other parts of the country were able to. And I wonder if that might happen here as well with warm spaces, or whatever they continue to be called. One of the challenges in Cambridge that's quite unique is we actually have a 30% turnover of population churn every year or other year. So people don't feel connected to their communities. They only live there for a short period of time. And it's a local issue that we need to think about how we tackle and support in a different way, whereas something that might work in a rural community wouldn't necessarily work here. So just thought I'd share that. And some of the thoughts that we're having to grapple with, really.
I think that's really interesting, and I do think how we ride the wave of these ongoing crises that arise and seek to capture the positive that comes out of people trying to step up to the mark, because we've had COVID. My feeling is that actually a lot of the goodwill there, for want of us thinking a bit more insightfully about how we sustain some of that, has been lost. People have almost just defaulted back, and that's true of institutions as well. Some of the things that you're able to do that were less bureaucratically configured during COVID, we've gone back to, death by form filling and stuff again. So I think there's stuff to learn from that. But I do think having a a network and an ongoing dialogue like this, where people can share their experiences in a cohesive geography like Cambridgeshire about what they can do to sustain people stepping up to the mark, because that's what this is all about, really. I mean, we can try and facilitate as professional agencies and groups and things, but it really is, you know, it's been very heartening that people have come forward with these ideas, but it is how we then enable them to pertain for the longer term. Anna.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just curious. I raised the point that I'm aware that some people don't engage with libraries because they have sort of preconceptions about what a library is, and maybe it's not for them. And I'm wondering if, you know, warm hubs that were held in places of worship or places associated with places of worship, did that have an impact on who engaged with it or not? You know, how thoughtful do we have to be about the venues for these places in terms of, you know, we can't all reach everybody, but are we putting barriers in the way of people because of the choice of venue sometimes?
Yeah, and again, I think that might vary according to the nature of the place. So in some village settings, it might be the most natural thing on earth to use the community building, which is the village hall, because that might be the only facility. But then in places like the city in Cambridge, you know, you have a vast range of different outlets and spaces that people could use. I do think understanding the dynamics of the place where things are held is something which is quite important, actually, and I hadn't previously thought of that very much, and she's going to hate me for doing this, so that's why I'm going to do it. But I don't know, in terms of the evaluation, Jessica, if you've discerned anything that might speak to that issue of how important the nature and character of the venue is.
Yes, and Alison's got some data on this, because we've looked at some venues and why they might have perhaps lower attendance than we were expecting. And I visited one of those, which actually, Anna, was a place of worship. And whilst it's not churchy at all, yeah, maybe some people are reluctant to go into the warm hub because it is in a place of worship. I don't know if Alison wants to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see a variety. Some of the ones that are running places of worship are, you know, staggering numbers of people attending, and as you say, some of the others perhaps are only drawing people from within their existing congregation rather than reaching out to new people. So I don't think I don't think we can definitely say, oh, just because it's a church it'll get low attendance, but yeah, definitely need some thought around what venues are perhaps best.
So what other insights might we have? We've had a good talk around the key issues here. I don't know if people have got. Yeah, I mean, it would be. I'm not prolonging this, and if people want to go and get a cup of tea in 5 minutes and say, well, thank you very much, that's been a useful thing to come to. That's fine. But I do wonder about where we go to next with this, and if people have got particular views about that. I know that Kirsten and her team at Cambridgeshire Acre are busy boiling up some ideas, but I do think it's quite interesting to, particularly in relation to the seasonality of, and perhaps that's why we're moving away from this title, warm hub, in addition to the fact that people don't want to be associated with being, in inverted commas, poor, so they've got to go to somewhere to keep warm. But there is a seasonal vibe to that as well, isn't there? So you might not be up for saying something about that, Leslie, because I think you put your hand up as I began to blather. But anyway, if I play you in and then come to Vicky. And
yeah, yeah, Ivan, you said about further insights and observations, and I just want to pick up on that point, because I think my observation, or our observation at South Cambs, is that, you know, the funding was distributed from the ICS, and there was an expectation, I guess, up front that services would be able to drop in and connect with the people attending the warm hubs. But that hasn't, it's worked well in some warm hubs, but not in all of them. And I guess what our sort of conversations that we've been having with Alison and Kirsten is that sometimes the hubs are only as good as the volunteers that are running them, or they're only, the connections are only as good as, you know, the volunteers that are working there, and know that huge tone that Alison has created inside out. And you know, you know, I guess the expectation going forwards will be that there will be that greater connection or opportunity for statutory services to be able to connect with residents they wouldn't normally reach. And you know, I think that at the moment, the volunteers have been, I guess in some time, I guess I'm trying to say this politely, sometimes seen as a barrier to that happening. And I think that that is something that needs to be addressed going forwards.
Yeah,
but it is something that we have spoken to with Alison and Kirsten, and I think we're sort of coming up with some solutions for the future.
I think that's a really important point. Vicky.
Thank you. I think for me, there's two thoughts going round in my head that I'm not sure we've been able to bottom out through this process. Not today, I mean, generally the scheme of warm spaces. And there's something about being able to collectively have a voice across the community and support sector to kind of push back a little bit, to say we don't need knee-jerk reactions. We don't need to be firefighting. We've had COVID, now we've got the cost of living, then we've got the next thing that's going to be around the corner, whatever that might be called, and actually quickly come up with a solution and not have the time we need to do collaboration and connect really well with communities who can come up with great community solutions, but we didn't give them time. We just quickly responded because we were under pressure politically and for other reasons. And I wonder what we could do collectively as a sector to be able to have weight in our thought, to know that that emergency response kind of framework doesn't work, in that there's quite a lot of pitfalls. And how do we say, hang on a minute, let's take our time, let's work with communities. Do they really need it? Is there evidence? What are their solutions? And certainly I feel like we didn't have the time at the beginning of what was called the cost of living crisis to be able to have those conversations.
I think that's right. I do wonder if now, because of social media and everything else, that when people at a community level mobilize around something, if things don't go much more viral than perhaps 10, 15 years ago they might have done. We did an evaluation last year of food banks, and there was this woman in Devon who'd used Facebook to generate over 40 different community-based food banks. She'd sort of developed her own transferable toolkit and spread this stuff around, and so I think there's an element to which people's ability to get involved in delivering things on their own account that they feel important is much more enhanced now. But I think there is a danger that these things pop into existence because of the latest issue, and we don't always have the infrastructure then to underpin sustaining them. And sometimes people can themselves be quite fickle in that they get revved up and excited for a couple of months, and it all becomes a bit hard work, and they sort of fall away again. So making all of that more sustainable, Kirsten is going to tell us how to do it.
Not really. No, I say, Chiefly, I think Alison probably thinking about the support needed, and I do think there's that funders and commissioners, providers do have unrealistic timetables on communities, saying that they're going to set these things up in 6 months and it's all going to be sustained, and we're going to find this money locally and go to the parish council and all of this, and or raise it through raising it at the fete or something in the village. Obviously you can get a bit of that, but that really will take time of community ownership to raise that kind of profile of a group to run that sustainably. That could take a good few years. For me, I think the learning, and from what we've seen, there's over 10,000 people come through the doors of these hubs. That I would have never ever expected that volume when we set this up. We were going on need of cost of living. We found a lot of other unmet needs with people in those communities, and some of them quite complex across those communities, those individuals. So, and my learning is I don't really know enough about how all this links up through this new ICS and the new health system, and how all this links up to social prescribers, or how it should or how it shouldn't, and how all that works together. I don't think we're there yet in the bits we've been working in. And it, you know, if we could really tackle that, I think that would really be able to help by bringing people within one system at a very local level to support individuals at the right stage they need that support. So for me, the next stage for us, regardless, the hubs will evolve, and we've asked people, and the volunteers want to continue. So where they do, we will work with those volunteers, but it is also that link to that, the statutory and the health services, and how we can make that better. We need to learn more about how we do that.
Yeah, and I think actually sometimes big organisations like integrated care systems and stuff see these things, and it's not a criticism because I think it's a universal principle. It's not just in Cambridgeshire, as a budget issue. You know, they've got some money, they can fund something for a given period of time to address a certain thing, but quite often, you know, what makes these things sustainable isn't a short-term funding injection. It's that longer term underpinning. and whilst nobody would turn down any funding, I don't think, unless it was very ill-advised support, it does leave us with that ongoing legacy of thinking about how we make these things sustainable. So Alison.
Yeah, Ivan, you can probably speak more eloquently on this than me, but I was just going to mention the social return on investment. Through our evaluation, we've been trying to sort of attach some financial proxies to some of the outcomes and outputs that we've seen, I believe. And I think, you know, what that I think will show is that, you know, for every pound of money that's been invested, you know, what's been realised is got a far greater value. So I just didn't know if you just wanted to mention that, Ivan. Yeah, so I'm not very eloquent on the subject.
Well, it sounded eloquent enough to me. I mean, social value is now perceived, I think, in public policy spheres, particularly since funding became more pressured, as an important way of managing the broader outcomes achieved by initiatives. And you know, it's quite an important element that public bodies particularly use in their thinking about how they're going to allocate the funds to things. So it's useful to be able to look at initiatives like the warm hubs and ascribe a bit of a value to those wider outcomes. And we've got a tool called the Social Value Engine, which is independently accredited by Social Value International. We've been able to, through the work Jessica particularly has done, to harvest information about people's experiences and outcomes, albeit, you know, it's based on a relatively short period of time, but also with regard to that Edinburgh Warwick scale as well, which has provided some insights, and to therefore begin to ascribe a value. It's a bit akin, if people have heard of the term before, to cost benefit analysis, but it's a bit more user friendly than that. And, just remind me, Jessica, what the sort of social value of this is suggesting in terms of a ratio.
Well, it's going to be over 2, which is part of the HM and Treasury, where it says anything between kind of £1.50 and 2 is average, and anything over 2 is good. Yeah.
So, you know, and if people read the evaluation report when it's published, you'll see the background to that. But I think, you know, using that technique, which is widely appreciated there in measuring the impact of public policy interventions, we can certainly show the potency around this this model, and therefore the rationale for continuing to support it. So thanks for, I think it's important just to pick that up, Alison. Thanks for introducing that. Harriet.
My question was around, for those who've visited their relevant warm hubs and spaces. So for example, when I've gone and visited mine, a bit ambitious, counting myself as a professional, but A lot of times I've been down, because people have said, this is Harriet, she's from HGC. I've had some conversations with vulnerable residents, a few of which have led to the completion of the referral form I mentioned in my presentation. Volunteers are unwilling to get trained up on extra stuff. Is the emphasis and introduction of professionals, i.e. social prescribers, something we want to consider long-term in introducing to warm spaces on a regular basis, because they, as a professional, will think, that person works for the NHS, they can help me with da-da-da-da-da. Whereas a volunteer is, somebody who helps at running the actual hub, cutting cake up, making cups of tea, whatever it is. But so I guess my question is, are you introducing professionals / partners into your warm spaces already? Is it something that you're in the middle of doing? Is it something you're trying to link up? I'm in the trying to link up phase. Yeah, that's sort of what it was.
I think it's a really interesting area, that interface, and some of it is it's the subtlety of it that's important, because I think if people feel that they're going to go to a warm up and become almost observed, as it were, and measured, then it would definitely, in addition to perhaps warm hub not being a good title, it might put them off. But that's not to say it isn't important, and we've seen some really good examples of those kind of community health interventions in rural settings by things like nurses being at farmers' marts, and it being the most natural thing in the world just to nip and have a chat with the nurse and get your blood pressure checked and stuff. So I think that there are ways of introducing that and managing that, but I think it needs to be done carefully. But I do think without some process of being able to make appropriate referrals, it is a bit challenging for volunteers to suddenly find themselves, in a situation of perhaps having to informally fall back just on their social skills to support people. And I know there have been some instances of that. So Rachel, are you going to offer us some insights about that?
Could I just add something very quickly?
Oh, sorry, Harriet.
Sorry,
yes,
Rachel, to interrupt you. The second thing was, a lot of residents don't have things like internet or email addresses, and that's also an issue as well. Has anyone experienced that? Sorry, Rachel.
Thank you. I think we need to get a dose of reality into this a little bit, in that we are only, as Leslie pointed out, talking about 4 months of something here. And the volunteers, for the most part, I don't think they signed up. I think they signed up to run a warm hub, whatever that is and whatever it was in their mind as a warm hub was. But I don't think the vast majority of them thought they would be responsible for making a lot of referrals for people with a lot of social issues, a lot of health issues. I don't think that is what they initially signed up for. I think they saw a potential need and thought that these hubs might actually address that potential need. So it may be that is the way that these evolve, and it's no bad thing in that respect. But I think at this point in time, I think the volunteers have been very focused on getting people on setting them up, getting people to their hubs, getting things happening in their hubs, and the basic running of them. There's been the odd, some hubs which are thinking bigger than that, but an awful lot of them are focusing on the smaller details of actually running the things at the moment. And obviously some of them are doing better than others, and those that aren't attracting a lot of people, all of their thinking is going on around how do they actually get people to their hubs. So I think while we're thinking about these making connections in the future, etc., it's a very valid point and definitely worth exploring. But I think we need to ask the volunteers what they want to do, actually. I really do, because I don't know that we know for definite that they want to do all of these things. And we also need to find out what kind of support that they think they need as well. That's just my experience of the ones that I visited anyway.
I think you raise an interesting point, really, because I think, should these things be purely volunteer driven, or should we have a wider interest in providing something that supports people who may have a whole range of challenges because of the cost of living crisis and the issues that arise from that. And just in a positive sense, to throw something back to you, Rachel, I mean, if these are principally just about people meeting for a cup of tea and a chat and doing a bit of neighbourliness type stuff, should we be putting any money into supporting them at all? Because surely people can just do that stuff for themselves. It's the wider benefits that become quite interesting in terms of this discussion. Sorry.
I'm not saying that's what they should be. I'm saying that's where the volunteer focus is and has been, I think, for the last few months. I think there's a lot of potential in them to develop them and grow them. But I'm just saying, I don't think we should be too hard on the volunteers or be disappointed that maybe some of the things we were hoping haven't happened. Because actually, we're only talking about 4 months. If we think about our own respective organisations, how far would we expect to have got with a programme or a project within 4 months? You know, I don't think we would expect it to be fully formed in that time. So I think I'm probably just defending the volunteers here a little bit, possibly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say I don't, you know, personally, I think we have said as part of this discussion, it's very early and we're at the sort of early middle phase of this, and it needs quite a lot longer to evolve, so we fully understand it. And I wouldn't want to criticise anybody who makes an effort to do something that underpins the function of these sort of services, and they are very variegated. You know, they're all quite different. They've all got their own character and personality, so we oughtn't to caricature them too much. And I do think you raised some interesting points there, which we need to take account of in the way we think about the next stage of their evolution. And what we mustn't do is try and make them too prescriptive and squeeze the life out of some of the local motivations people have for organising them. But James.
Yeah, a couple of things. Obviously, on the digital inclusion side of things, if people are kind of grappling with that, a couple of things to think of. One is get yourself linked into the Cambridgeshire Digital Partnership. So that's a load of organisations around Cambridgeshire who are interested in digital exclusion. I'm kind of, my background is digital inclusion for about the last 15 years, so happy to answer any individual questions on that one. But yes, there is a lot of digital exclusion, and people really, I think, haven't grasped how impactful that is, or how wide it is, and it is a real issue. So, you know, if people aren't taking that into account, then it's a big hole in the puzzle, shall we say. But, you know, happy to answer any specific questions on that. And I suppose what I was just thinking is that, you know, we're talking about the volunteers, and, you know, Rachel's quite right, I think, to say that some people will be just thinking they've got the blitz spirit and they're jumping in here for, you know, kind of this year's crisis, and they will step back. But I think, you know, what you may see is, you know, there'll be some volunteers that will, and some volunteers that actually either didn't just think of it in the short term, or actually have got a taste for it, and you want to continue those things. But I think what I was interested in today is, what do we learn from the hub model itself, just in terms of these unexpected, you know, largely unexpected outcomes. What do we do to preserve that, you know, independent of volunteers taking things on or not taking things on? Because I think what I'm hearing is that the value of a hub is the thing that's perhaps coming out of this, and how do we make sure we don't lose that, and keep that going, whether that be, you know, in a funded professional way, or a volunteer way, or a blended way. I mean, I think perhaps to get the most impact, you're looking at some kind of and sustainability, then you're looking at a model where you do have volunteers, but maybe you have some kind of professional support coming in and underpinning that, and providing those, you know, the signposting and referral, like Harriet mentioned, with social prescribers or advice workers. Just a side point on the advice side of things, people might not be aware, but you can get a free level 2 MVQ in advice and guidance through a number of the online learning platforms. So if you've got volunteers that are hungry to do more and do want to take on more, you know, and would like to feel more confident in what they're doing, then that's something that you could signpost them to, which, you know, just give them a basic grounding and just a bit of basic confidence in how to offer information and advice to their people.
really useful heads up there. Thanks very much, James. Well, we're nearly at 4 o'clock now. I think this discussion has raised as many interesting questions as it's answered, and I don't mean that by way of a critique, but what it does really demonstrate to me is that this whole concept is very important. I think it's of the moment and it's still evolving and developing. And I would like, I'm not a craven flatterer, but I would like to particularly commend Alison and Kirsten for taking the opportunity to get people together around this discussion now, because I think that there is a chance for this group to stay together and perhaps to continue networking and thinking about how what's currently happening is shaped and developed going forward. And it's refreshing, as somebody who spends most of his time flitting around rural meetings, that we've had the Cambridge City experience here as well, and we've taken a very even-handed, broad view of all of this. But I think because of the time that we've got, and we have recorded this, there's a bit of work to pick the bones out of it all. But I'd perhaps better hand back to Kirsten now, just to see if there are any final things you want to say before we perhaps wind up, Kirsten.
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. I suppose for me, similar to you, what's come out of it is how critical these kind of hubs are, but they're critical for the people going there. They're critical because we're using volunteers and we need to support those volunteers at this time. But I also think at this point, this meeting has really been good because it's almost like a critical point of what we do next in each area, and that's come out for me because we've been struggling ourselves with this, and actually this is happening across all of it. The same sort of debates, the same sorts of things coming out. We're sort of struggling with at this time. So thank you everyone who's come here and presented, because I think the presentations were excellent, and they sort of aligned up the conversation we've had at the end. And we will, if this has been useful, have another one of these events. I suggest we perhaps leave it, say, 3 months, and then see, because I think the next 3 months are going to be a really crucial time for what happens next when we go into the sort of spring, summer, to what these become, whether they're not warm ups anymore and there's something else and they've evolved. So let's say 3 months, we could call another one of these meetings if that's useful for people. From our point of view, we will have the evaluation report from what we've done, which we've collected an awful lot of data about the people going there. We've got this social return on investment to finalise within that report. So Jessica, I think that's going to be finished the end of April, were we saying?
Yeah, it'll be coming out in April.
Yeah, so we will share that with everyone, because I think that will really be a useful report for everyone to just read what we've done and what we haven't done and how things have gone. The next steps to say, well, we'll call another meeting. I suppose for me, the other thing at the end here, I really want to thank, and it's come through very clearly here, about the community element and volunteers, because none of us would be sitting here talking about warm hubs in the models we've used without the volunteers out there. And I do know, and Rachel was defending them, but she doesn't have to, because she works them every day, so she knows how many hours those volunteers put in at a community level to make good for the people where they live. And actually the places of Cambridgeshire would not be the same without the people and the residents that live there and have stepped forward over this 6 months to lead their warm hub. And there's been people I know that have gone there who've been really their life has been made better through what's been done over this last months through these warm hubs. We do know that through the reporting we've had back, and I'm sure the others in the other areas you've got similar experiences. So I'm going to leave that there. We're going to write. Well, we'll get all this transaction of this chat off, because that might be useful. We'll send you the video. We'll send you the presentations, and we hope to see you again in about 3 months' time. Well, we'll have another one of these meetings, and we'll, in the meantime, as Cambridgeshire Acre, we'll keep in touch with you to what we're doing, and you keep in touch with us with what you're doing. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Kirsten.
you.
Thank you.